dear friends. It's always a joy to meet you all through this morning devotion. For today's meditation, I've taken the verses from Psalms chapter 54. In this psalm, the context where David writes this psalm is he was running away from Saul, and what happens is the Ziphites they betray David. They are going and telling David where Saul is, where he is hiding, and that is the circumstance that he is now. Okay, so the trusted circle, the ones whom he trusted would uphold him in times of trouble, were the very ones who turned around at him, and they were also driving behind him to knock him down. Okay, so we might have faced such a situation, or maybe currently in a situation like this. Whatever it may be, what are the things that we need to learn from this is what we are going to meditate for a few minutes. Firstly, we need to remember that they were supporters for both Saul and for King David. Saul was very clearly going against God's anointed one, and he deliberately did it. He knew that King David was anointed by God, and he also very well he knew that he himself is sinning against God. But still he had supporters with him. Okay, and David also had supporters. Okay, now we need to remember that in the world that we currently live in, there are supporters for both evil and for good. Okay, and there are more supporters for the evil than for the good. William Lane Craig, he's an apologetic preacher, and he says like this: in a world without God, who's to say whose values are right and whose values are wrong? There can be no objective right and wrong, only our culturally and personally relative subjective judgment. Think of what that means. It means it's impossible to condemn war, oppression, or crime as evil, nor can you praise generosity, self-sacrifice, and love as good. To kill someone or to love someone is morally equivalent. For in a universe without God, good and evil do not exist. There is only the bare, valueless fact of existence, and there is no one to say you are right and I am wrong. Okay, so the same thing we see here in this psalm. In verse 3, we read the nature of the people who have risen against King David. He says like this: for strangers have risen against me. Ruthless men seek my life. They do not set God before themselves. So very clearly he says that they are people who have not set God before them. On the contrary, we know very well that in Psalms chapter 16 verse 8, David says, I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. So as children of God, we need to remember that whatever situation we may be in, have we set the Lord before us? If we have set the Lord before us, we need not fear anything. And this setting the Lord before us is a deliberate and it's a conscious resolution that we need to make. Every time we go through that, we need to make this resolution. Okay. Secondly, we see three attributes of God that David focuses on for three of his requests. Okay. He needs three specific deliverances, and for these three deliverances, he is focusing on three attributes of God. In verse 1, if you read, he says, O God, save me by your name. He wants God to save him, but how? By your name. We know the name of the power that is there in the name of God, right? And we have seen many circumstances in our own lives wherein God has delivered us by his name. So here again, David, he's entrusting his salvation only in the name of God. By seeing David trusting in the name of the Lord, his son Solomon has written in Proverbs 18:10, the name of the Lord is a strong tower, The righteous run into it and are protected. Okay. And again in verse 1 he says, "Vindicate me, O Lord, by your might." Vindicate me by your might. So he needs vindication, but how is it going to come? It is going to come by the might of our God. Okay, and we all know what all the might of God has accomplished, right? From Genesis to Revelation, we have read, we know all the miracles that have happened by the might of our God. And even now, what his might does, we are seeing, right? And in Psalm 147:5, we read, "Great is our Lord and mighty is his power, mighty in power. His understanding has no limit." Even Job says that in Job 9:4, "For God is so wise and so mighty." Okay, so we need to remember that vindication comes only by the might of God. And again in verse 5 he says, "In your faithfulness put an end to my enemies." So he needs an end to his enemies, but how is it possible? In God's faithfulness. In Psalm 91:4 we read, "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and rampart." Okay, so God's faithfulness is what we need for our, for putting an end to our enemies. Thirdly, we see the proclamation of David. It's a faith, those words are out of faith. In Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1 we read, right? "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." David is actually in the very situation that is turned around against him. But in that situation, he is proclaiming what is not yet seen. He's telling in verses 4 to 7, "Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life. He will return the evil to my enemies. In your faithfulness, put an end to them. With a freewill offering, I will sacrifice to you. I will give thanks to your name, O Lord, for it is good. For he has delivered me from every trouble, and my eye has looked in triumph on my enemies." So this is what, he shows that he is a man of faith. Okay, and he is living a life of faith in his true sense, not only in his word but also in its action. So let's remember these three things. One is, whatever situation we are in, let us put the Lord always before us. Trust in his name, his might, and in his faithfulness. And let's rejoice in the hope of his salvation. And let's be his witnesses always. Thank you.